We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. We're getting straight to the jugular today. Ladies and gentlemen, this show, here's a warning for anyone who's watching. If you're easily triggered by violence or the idea of people killing one another in history, there is going to be some graphic material in that sense. And so if you don't have that kind of stomach, this isn't the video for you. But for those who've been watching the series so far, you know who our guests are here on MythVision. Really, they're like the host, actually, of this series. And I'm just a guest. But we have Bryce Blankenagel. For those who don't know, he's the host of a program called Naked Mormonism Podcast. You can go on his Patreon, join it for free. It's down in the description. And you can catch up. No one has examined that I am aware of on podcast format the Mormon history and the religion and delving into the nook and cranny of that stuff like Bryce Blankenagel. So I ask all of you to go help support what he's doing. And if you don't know who he is, by the end of the show, you'll probably want to join it. It's free. You can't pass up free. What are you waiting for? David Fitzgerald, he is the author of The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons, Book 1. I got it this time. And this is an excellent starter book, so to speak. If you're like me and you want to just go straight to like the absurdities of certain religions and go, what the hell was this about? You want to check this book out. It's an airplane view of all of the Mormon craziness and then some historical stuff. But it's like for people like me who aren't really knowing the nook and cranny. So you have the best of both worlds here. I ask you to go down in the description, get the book. With that being said, gentlemen, put my earmuffs on. Go ahead and take us into the crazy.
Hear no evil today. Yeah, I'm glad that you introduced it, that this is some graphic material, because we are going to be discussing some ugly stuff today, a dark corner of American history. And it's within the broader context of the Mormon settlement era and the Reformation era. And there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of problems with what occurred at what is going to be, based on the title and the description, the Mountain Meadows Massacre. This is an ugly and horrific time of American history, and the cover-up of it has been long and storied and religiously motivated as much as the murders themselves were. So, and yeah.
Even today, Mormons are still dealing with it and coming to terms with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a cover-up campaign that has spanned over 140 years. It's pretty remarkable. So where we kind of left off was kind of discussing the Mormon settlement era as well as the Reformation era, right? So Brigham Young didn't want to step down as governor of Utah, but President James Buchanan was like, "Hey, you've been governor for 8 years. Let's make you let's put somebody else in the governor." And Brigham was like, "No, I like it here. I like being the little king of my little theocracy. This is great." So this all catalyzed what came to be known as Buchanan's blunder, and it's known as the Mormon War, the Utah War. That was a Cold War. I'm glad you put it in scare quotes there.
It almost became a war, but yeah.
Almost. It was teetering on the edge, right? Yeah. Because Brigham didn't want to step down.
Way. Yeah, the troops were on their way to deal with this Utah situation.
Yeah, and it's notable 2,500 federal government troops were headed in, armed and ready to violently unseat Brigham Young if they had to. And Brigham had matched them with 2,500 Mormon troops set up in Cottonwood Canyon to receive them. So the Mormons had strategic advantage, and obviously Buchanan's men knew this, and they had to broker a deal in order to get out from any bloodshed actually occurring, which did end up happening. Brigham Young did end up stepping down, but there's so many caveats and qualifiers, and that happened after the events that we're discussing today. So what we're discussing today is obviously this rhetoric, this exciting time of Mormon history in this Reformation era where everybody is very motivated and hating the government.
Well, and not only that, so that's the external threat. Meanwhile, this Mormon Reformation is really a Mormon cultural war. It's paranoid. It's neighbors informing on neighbors, kinsmen informing on kinsmen, people trying to escape Utah and getting hunted down and their throat slit for it. All kinds of crazy, paranoid Soviet era stuff is going on right now. Could not be a worse time to be a Mormon or somebody wandering into Mormon territory.
Yeah. And the anti-government rhetoric was really turned up quite a lot at this time as well. You know, church leaders, and granted, what we do have from them in the Journal of Discourses reveals some very troubling statements about the government trying to, to bring the war to Utah, about Utah being the sanctuary that will be left when the government kills itself. And, the Constitution will hang by a thread and it will be up to us to save it. And that, Brigham was waiting for the Civil War to happen for the North and South to kill each other off. And then what would be left, Mormons would come in and conquer the rest. So Brigham Young was very much waiting for the Civil War to happen, but that also fueled a lot of this anti-government rhetoric.
What year are we in, just to keep everyone who's watching?
57.
1857.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and everybody knew the nation was teetering on civil war. Like this was no new revelations. It was just a matter of time before the South was going to secede over the slavery issue. So within the context of all of this, there are also a lot of people leaving the church because of the Reformation era is so iron-fisted. It was a very hard time to be a Mormon because everybody was tattling on everybody. They required rebaptisms to make sure that you were actually, loyal. There were tests of fealty of all sorts among the Mormons. And
as we saw, some people were only guilty of, like, for instance, being engaged to the wrong woman that some bishop wanted for his wife. And they were getting killed in nasty, nasty ways for it. Yeah, very scary time. The
Danites were an ever-present force, right? So there's the approved of, Utah militia that was the Nauvoo Legion that Brigham Young carried over from the Nauvoo Legion in actual Nauvoo. But beyond that, there was also the Danites. The Danites were still alive and thriving, and there was a lot of interplay between the approved of state militia and the Danites themselves. And in this is Porter Rockwell and John D. Lee and Isaac Haight and all sorts of seedy and nasty figures. Jedediah Grant, Brigham's sledgehammer, who led the Reformation. Right. This is a really scary time to be in Utah.
And
nobody was safe. Absolutely not. One of the ways that you could escape Utah, though, was under the cover of night, joining up with wagon trains that were passing through, because this is the California gold rush that's going on, right? That started in 1849, 1850. And for the next 2 to 3 decades after that, California was populated by people passing through Utah on wagon trains and trading with the Mormons, getting resupplied through Utah and making the trek the rest of the way across Nevada and into California. So when people wanted to defect, when they wanted to leave, one of the only safe ways they could do it was to seek refuge with these wagon trains. And there are a lot of stories, of course, of mistreated polygamous women joining up with these wagon trains, going out to California with them and living out the rest of their lives in California. Some of them were audacious enough to publish exposés of what they had experienced. Wife number 19 was known as one of the largest and most well-known exposés written by one of the polygamous wives of Brigham Young specifically, who escaped in this manner.
This reminds me of something that happened. I can't remember if this happened before or after this particular time we're talking about, but at one point Brigham Young got so fed up with complaints from the Mormon women, they said, look, any sister who's fed up with this, they can go leave for free. And so many women took him up on it that he had to back away, retract his offer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Probably sick of the abuse, honestly.
It was a viciously patriarchal system. As a product of the culture as well as the religion itself. This is a system of polygyny, right? Polygamy is a catch-all term, but polygyny is one man, multiple women, and by its structure, it's inherently has a lot of openings for very abusive practices. Then, as much as it does today, but of course, back then there was no recourse. There was nowhere to go. There was no town that was a non-Mormon town within 1,000 miles of Salt Lake City. What do? You live out your life under a system of vicious abuse. It's not great. It's not great. So obviously this causes the Mormons, who are part of the Reformation and are, straight-laced Mormons, they're very suspicious of wagon trains passing through, because their neighbor might join up with that wagon train and then go to California and tell the LA Times about what's going on in Utah. So this causes even more suspicion of everybody's neighbors, as well as the wagon trains themselves. Now, to add into all of this mix, Parley P. Pratt. This is a guy who was one of the earliest church members, earliest church leaders, an early apostle, a very close friend and confidant of Joseph Smith, multiple
Archer
missions for the church. Archer of Heaven, maybe?
Like that.
I can't. I've never heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had nicknames for everybody. So he's one of the highest ranking Mormons, and he is one of Brigham Young's closest friends. This guy, he goes to California and he steals a guy's wife, and they make their way to Utah and they get married, and then they flee because they know that the guy is coming after his wife, who he was not granting a divorce. So they end up fleeing closer, or heading east, and they get to Arkansas before this estranged husband catches up to them. This estranged husband finds Parley P. Pratt, encounters him in a cornfield, shoots him, stabs him, just murders him, leaves him to die in the cornfield. And Parley P. Pratt becomes the newest Mormon martyr for polygamy and religious freedom of exercise.
Oh my gosh. Like, you know how many martyrs there are in the world right now then? I mean, how many men have been killed sleeping with another man's wife?
That's what kills me when they have that "who would die for a lie" thing. Well, people die for a lie every single day.
Every day. Every fucking day. Yes.
Wow.
Exactly. So that obviously the martyrdom narrative was created by Joseph Smith, and the persecution narrative in and of itself was. Yeah. And then with the deaths of Joseph and Hiram, which we discussed at length a few episodes ago, played into that persecution narrative that these men died as martyrs. And Brigham Young implemented something into the endowment ceremony that came to be known as blood atonement, or the oath of vengeance. And the oath of vengeance says specifically this was implemented in 1845 and was removed in 1930. So Mormons said this in the temple until 1930. It says, "You and each of you do covenant and promise that you will pray and never cease to pray to Almighty God to avenge the blood of the prophets upon this nation, and that you will teach the same to your children and your children's children unto the third and fourth generation." That was part of the temple oath. That is what you are making a covenant to God that you will do, and also miming slitting your own throat if you reveal the secrets of the endowment.
Oh my gosh. So they stopped saying that. That's good. They stopped saying that. That's good.
In 1930. Yeah.
When did they finally take out the throat slitting and the belly cutting?
1990.
Thank you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that oath of vengeance is really important because it motivated a lot of Danites to do a lot of what they did, right? Because there was always the covenants that these people made. If Brigham Young told them that this person, X person is an apostate, or they're an enemy of the kingdom, the Danite doesn't want to take action against the person. Well, Brigham Young can say, well, what about your oath? What about your temple covenants? What about your oath to God? Would you turn your back on God? I have to murder
you. Sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or in the case of people like Jedediah Grant and Porter Rockwell, it's like, oh, I guess I get to murder you.
Wow.
So here enters the Baker-Fancher Party. They happen to be passing through Arkansas on their way to California through Utah. They go through Arkansas the same week that Parley P. Pratt is murdered. And it's pure coincidence. But unfortunately, the rhetoric of the time and Brigham Young and other church leaders putting Parley Pratt up as a martyr to the cause it created a cognitive connection for the Mormons that the Baker-Fancher Party were responsible for murdering Parley Pratt. And beyond that, Brigham Young had been saying that government spies were in all of these wagon trains. We have to be super suspicious of them.
Yeah. And the rumor mill started after that. That was just the starting point for the rumor mills. But then they started saying, oh, they're from Arkansas where they killed Parley Pratt. Oh, wait, they're from Missouri. Oh, wait, they were guys whose kinsmen killed Joseph and Hiram. Oh, no, they were the guys who killed Joseph and Hiram. They've got the very gun that killed Joseph and Hiram.
Yeah.
No. It kept ratcheting up, you know. And these poor guys have no clue. They have no clue. They're going through Utah and like, yeah, these Mormons, they don't really like us very much. Let's keep going. You know, let's just get out of here.
But it also reveals an interesting tension, right? Because the Mormons needed the wagon trains to survive. The wagon trains would bring goods in. The Mormons would be able to sell their goods. And the wagon trains headed to California. The California Gold Rush was an integral piece of the Utah economy. They needed this. But they also were trying to keep out government spies that were in all of these wagon trains, to make sure that
paranoia prophet.
Exactly. What do you do? Right? So Brigham Young was able to keep these forces in tension as the leader and keep the rhetoric turned up. And it so happens that the Baker-Fancher Party, who were completely unaware of what was going on, passing through at the wrong place at the wrong time, became the victims of this rhetoric. They became the targets that the Mormons basically said, these are the people responsible for it. But that was also just a radical minority of Mormons who believed that the Baker-Fancher Party were the people who killed Joseph and Hiram, right? But Brigham Young was part of that radical minority, and he commanded all of the Mormons to not trade with the Baker-Fancher Party. Now, if you're on a wagon train, you have to trade with the Mormons in order to make it across the deserts of Utah to Nevada and most of California until you get to California, the coasts of California where there's more settlements. You have to trade with the Mormons, and that is part of the wagon train's planning strategy, is trading and resupplying as you travel through Utah. And the people would make goods on the wagon trail, or they would bring goods with them, trade it to the Mormons, get food, get gunpowder, get whatever they needed to make the rest of the trek. And a lot of these wagon trains were also pretty wealthy. A lot of fairly wealthy people going from the East Coast and going out to settle in California. So the Mormons are also seeing these wagons that are well stocked passing through their towns. It's like, that's a nice wagon you got there, huh? That's real nice. Be a shame if some Indians were to raid it.
Right? Yeah. Those crazy Paiutes, watch out for those Redskins.
That's right. Yep. And there are, obviously there are a lot of stories of Native Americans raiding these wagon trains. I think very few of them have actually any substance that were actually executed by Native Americans. I think almost all of it was Mormons with tan face. That's just much more likely to have happened.
This makes me wonder too, this whole psychosis situation they're in a way, makes me think, are there drugs involved in the Mormon movement at this moment? Is there substances that are causing them to be more paranoid than they really should be? I mean, maybe not, because they already were targets as it is. I mean, looking at their history, these guys are ready for war. It's like they want something to go wrong. But I just kind of wonder, like, the guy looking out the window, the cops are coming. He's tripping on it.
It does seem like it's ramped up to such a degree that, but I mean, paranoia and political rhetoric and just, a society turning on itself and eating itself, that you'll get that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you don't need drugs to explain that, right? Like that's shit's just human. That's just what we do. Yeah. With otherizing, with demonizing other fellow humans, and there are all of these events are very human. They're very natural. Stuff like this has been happening throughout all of our history, and it's just a matter of, like, this is the most recent, and it's a heinous act in American history, and it's white people who died, so we pay attention to it, right?
Bingo, because this was the biggest massacre of white people in American soil, and would be all the way up until the bombing in Oklahoma City.
I didn't know that, but that sounds about right. Yeah. But also to be fair, right, like this happened, I think 3 years after the Bear River Massacre, which was like 3 times the size of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. But those were Native American. Those were Lamanites. I'm sorry. So who cares? Right.
Yeah. And that's something to realize too. Yeah. Like the Tulsa race riots, these, every Indian massacre from the dawn of time till today. And we don't hear about any of those. Hear about any of that history.
Yeah. I think it's good for us to at least give a partial voice to that while we're discussing the Mountain Meadows Massacre, is that this has so much attention because the victims were white. They were European settlers.
Yeah.
And it is dwarfed in comparison to many massacres that happened of natives, of even of Chinese immigrants, of all sorts of people that we deem as undesirables in society. So this wagon train, it included about 140 people of all ages, and it cost today's equivalent of about $50,000 to make the trek. So people were pretty well supplied. These wagons were, they had a lot of material goods that were worth a lot of money. They just, needed the foodstuffs and the staples in order to get across the rest of the journey to California. But Brigham Young said, no trading with them. And there's even a report of a woman that was excommunicated because she traded a wheel of cheese to them in exchange for a hand-woven blanket that was made during the trek. I don't know the details of it or if that story is even true, but it's one of those that lives on in folklore anyway. So Brigham Young worked to starve this wagon train out. Absolutely. One thing that's worth noting here is the speed of communication. Telegraph didn't exist in Utah at this time. It wouldn't be there for another, I think, 9 years or something before Brigham Young set up his telegraph company. So communication was pretty slow. It was speed of horseback. So we need to keep that in context of all of this, that events are transpiring that are spaced out among just a few days. And faster communication could have resolved things or could have inhibited some of these things from happening, but didn't, because everything was at the speed of horseback. So as all of these trends and forces are going, the Baker-Fancher Party makes their way through Utah. They're regarded with suspicion. Their wagon train is looking really wealthy. They're not able to get resupplied. They finally make it to a popular holdover point known as Mountain Meadows. And it's just north of St. George. It's a very pretty area. It's, lined with mountains in all directions. And it's a gorgeous area. You can go to it today, actually. And it is beautiful, and they planned on that being a place where they could, wait for a few days, recharge the batteries, feed all of the livestock, and then they would progress all the way through into Las Vegas after that.
Yeah, pretty much your last stop in Utah is that part, because they're clear down in the southwest corner of Utah now. It's like, all right, we made it this far. Now we can get the hell out of Utah and be rid of this place.
Yeah, the next day of journey would have been anywhere from 20 to 40 miles, and that would have taken them out of Utah.
I don't know why I have to say this, but just by the way this is being described and the way that this is being narrated historically, like, why do the Mormons have to be so annoying? Like honestly, I mean, you imagine, like, everyone needs to get to Cali, right? That's going. They have to be there, but these people have to be a problem. Like, they have to be a problem here. You see what I'm saying? It's like,
you're not wrong.
Fix it. I'm just bitching here. I'm bitching.
Derek,
so
you're not wrong. Yeah,
you're not wrong. But I think if we view it within the context that the Mormons wanted to rule the world, it makes a lot more sense.
I mean, I'd say the same thing about any other religious person. So what religious people, but it's just so annoying that they can't go anywhere in their early stages. It's just what blows me away is they can't go anywhere, guys, and not become a pain in everyone's ass.
Right.
They just so can't
bad,
get along.
And then they act like they're the victims. Like, well, right. All we did was try to take over the entire county and make a theocracy. And then,
I don't know. I mean,
my religious freedoms.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Christopher Hitchens would have something pithy to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like Utah never grew out of this too, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
this is all of these things that we're discussing now are the blueprints and foundation of Utah.
Yeah.
The Utah of today was built on those blueprints and foundation.
Yeah.
So,
And we haven't even
keep
talked
that in
about
mind.
we haven't even talked about the breakaway sects of the Mormons very much. But that's a whole scary Taliban level of craziness too. And
yeah, the Morasites holed up in a fort and had a cannon blasted through them, and horrible stuff is going on in Utah at this time. And you know what? It's any theocracy or any monarchy with a tyrannical dictator like Brigham Young is going to have stories like this. Yeah. This is not unique to Utah. It's just, the Mormon flavor is unique to Utah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know. I had to say that,
So it's also notable too, right? Like the Mormons had really weird relationships with the various Native American tribes. And it's really complicated because there were some tribes that the Mormons were like immediately at war with, and if they saw it was shoot on sight orders. Others they were trading with. Some of them they were trading, flour that was laced with glass. Some of them they were actually trading in good faith. It's a really, and then also like taking their daughters as sex slaves, and it's a really weird kind of relationship that they have with all the Native Americans. But one of the groups of natives, it's Paiute is a pretty loose and broad term. It encompasses 5 different tribes, but the Paiute natives, in many regards, were on fairly amicable relations with the Mormons. And they mutually benefited from these relationships. And this is after Wakara was killed because he tried to confederate the Paiutes to fight Brigham Young. Wakara is killed, and then the Paiutes just kind of have to acquiesce to whatever the Mormons want to do. So the Mormons and Paiutes kind of work together in a lot of these things. And at this time, this is when Brigham Young is saying, the Lord has come out of his hiding place, and the Indians have to commence their work. The natives would work with the Mormons in possibly raiding some of these wagon trains. Or maybe it was just all Mormons that were all painted with tan face. Right. It's tough to tell, right? They didn't exactly keep down records of all of the raids that they conducted and the names of the participants.
Secret evil plans. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But keep that in mind as we talk about the Indian involvement in these. May have been no Indians whatsoever. Yeah.
So September 7th of 1857 is when the Baker-Fancher Party makes camp in Mountain Meadows, and they're planning on staying there probably 4 days and then leaving and heading out of Utah for Nevada. And it was the leadership in southern Utah, in Parowan, in St. George, in Kanab, in these small Mormon settlements around, were debating what to do with the Baker-Fancher Party because Brigham Young, his rhetoric had caused the Mormons to think that there are spies in here, that this is a government, conspiracy. These are not just settlers. These are people who are coming to spy on us, who are coming to kill our people, who are coming to take over our theocracy, whatever. So Brigham Young had created that rhetoric, and Brigham Young declared freaking martial law. So, what do we do with
caravans? Immigrant caravans have come to
literally immigrant caravans are showing up at the borders, and we have to protect ourselves.
Yes.
So weird. I have a question leading up to this family that's now sitting here for 4 days. What, I guess, since everything travels by horseback, how did they get the tip off that this family was there at the same time? Like, who's telling the Mormons? These people showed up.
They've been making their way slowly across Utah this whole time.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like a week and a half, 2-week journey through Utah. And while information traveled at the speed of horseback, Utah is filled with people talking, right? Because there's not a whole lot to do in Utah other than talk to each other at this time, right? So people are constantly talking. Riders are constantly exchanging information across towns. Letters are exchanging quickly. So things are traveling. Information is traveling at the speed of horseback, but it is traveling in every direction at the speed of horseback. So the leaders of the southern Utah settlements, and that's John D. Lee, Isaac Haight, who else?
Keep going.
John Higbee, Philip Klingensmith. These leaders meet and they say, what do we do about this wagon train? If we let them get outside of Utah, they're going to spill our secrets. They're going to, tell the government, and then we have a bigger problem on our hands. What do we do to keep them here, to keep them from leaving? So Isaac Haight sends a rider up to Salt Lake City to meet with Brigham Young, and this happens on September 7th. The writer is asking Brigham Young, what do we do in this situation? Because this is a big question. Utah's under martial law. So basically anything can go as long as it's forwarding the general mission of preserving Utah and keeping Utah in the control of the Mormons and Brigham Young. So Brigham Young hears about what's going on, and he sends a letter that says that the Baker Party should not be meddled with and should be allowed to go in peace. But then he also acknowledged in that same letter that the Native Americans can do as they please. This letter arrived 2 days after the massacre happened. It arrived too late. But
and I just want to point out, because other commentators have made the point that Brigham Young had to send a letter to say, don't kill these innocent people. That's it's a bit of a catch-22,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of people bicker and argue about, did Brigham Young command the Baker-Fancher Party to be killed? Did he do it? Does he have blood on his hands? It's like, he's responsible. He bears a lot of the responsibility for building up the rhetoric for the previous years. I mean, more than half a decade that created the atmosphere where people felt justified in murdering over 100 people.
And that's at best. That's giving him a best case scenario.
Yeah, that's being most generous to his legacy. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Ignoring the fact that nothing happened in Utah without his say-so. Yeah.
Yeah, he knew everything. Yeah, I mean, he had little birdies everywhere.
Yeah.
So September 7th happens. They send out this rider, and they realize that the Baker-Fancher Party is going to be leaving the next day. So they decide to take executive action. And John D. Lee and Isaac Haight gather their troops around the Mountain Meadows, and they begin the siege. Now, they had worked together with some Paiutes to be basically the fall guys for this, and the Mormon troops had painted their faces with dirt, mud to make them look like Native Americans. And they did this to try and blame the natives for what was going to happen. So the morning of September 8th, I believe it is, the Baker-Fancher Party, they were sitting down for breakfast of, quail, rabbit, whatever they could find, because they couldn't get any foodstuffs from the Mormons. And they hear a shot ring out, and a little boy buckles over and falls off of the bench. He was shot in the stomach and died pretty soon after. Immediately followed is a volley of shots from all of the Mormons. And in this initial salvo, I believe 8 people died, and another 16.
Yeah.
What was that?
I think it was 7 died immediately, almost instantly. 7 men, and others were wounded.
And I think 16 others were wounded at this time. This is the initial salvo. The Baker-Fancher Party, completely not expecting this. Shots ring out from all directions around them, and a bunch of them just plop over dead. A bunch of them have gunshots, lodged in their body, and they realize, holy crap, we're under siege. We got to do something.
Right. So, including one of the first to go down is the captain of the whole, the commander of the whole wagon train, Alexander Fancher, goes down. Yeah. Boom. And his 25-year-old nephew has to be filling in his shoes.
How many people were there?
There are just over 140 in this, and they culled the population down by 7-8% in the first salvo.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to Mountain Meadows, you can see what it looks like. It's a beautiful area. There's a small creek running through it. So there is a freshwater source. It's mountain runoff water, so it's clean and it's cold and it tastes delicious. There's grass everywhere. There are rabbits. There are things that to eat for the livestock and for the humans. It's a beautiful area, but the way that it's structured is there's kind of a plateau area that's above the creek, and that's where they have had their encampment set up. The creek itself is down, a number of yards away from the elevated platform where they were, camped out. And therefore, when this salvo went off, the Baker-Fancher Party immediately circled their wagons and created a makeshift breastwork in this open field, but that cut them off from their water supply.
And their herds, too, for that matter.
Their herds as well. So they are in a situation where if they step outside of the ring of wagons, they're shot and killed, but there's no source of water or food available to them there, and now they have to deal with a bunch of corpses that they're surrounded by of their friends and family,
and wounded. They're still wounded out there. Yep. They're
Lots
still
of
wounded that
well.
can't get to.
I'm sorry. I had to Google some of the images from it. I was like, hold on, let me look at this. So while you're talking, I'm looking at these images. I'm like, huh? But yeah, there's like some sites, and then there's some really old photos, black and white photos from like someone being massacred or something. I can't executed or something. I don't know, but did they have weapons? Did these people have anything to defend themselves?
They did. They had their rifles. In fact, one of the women was firing at the first in the first salvo, firing back at the Mormons. But they had a limited amount of ammo, and pretty soon it was just sniper war.
It's also notable in this first salvo, they had the natives who agreed to work with them. And obviously the carrot approach that they used was, if you help us, then the spoils of this attack will divvy it up. So the natives came in to help them. The few Paiutes that decided to help with this raid, they ran in the first salvo while the Mormons stayed back.
Right.
A couple of those natives were shot in that first salvo when the Fancher Party returned fire, and then they fled. They got the hell out of there. They were smart.
Yeah.
So basically, after the first 20 minutes of the fight, all that was left was just the Mormons. Because they had other reasons. They now had committed acts of murder, and they could not allow this group to leave Utah, or what are the ramifications of that, right? The Utah War no longer is a Cold War.
And everybody in that wagon train knows that they are not going to let them out. And they have, like you said, Mormon apostates with them who are saying, we can't do this. We're in a bad situation here.
Yeah. So this siege persisted for 5 days. 5 days. The Mormon troops had the Baker-Fancher Party under siege, and it's notable that the party was cut off. They had nowhere to get food. They had nowhere to get water. At one point, they sent out 2 little girls in white dresses to go collect water for the people, and just trying to do anything they can to just survive for a little bit longer. And the 2 girls were shot when they left the ring of wagons instantly.
Yeah.
So this is horrifying. This is absolutely horrible. A 5-day siege. Cut off from food and water,
while the corpses are rotting in the fields and the wounded are dying in the fields that no one can get to.
And the ammunition depleting quickly, right? Because the Mormons, they can have runners go to nearby Parowan, pick up more shot and powder, and bring it to the reinforce the troops. Baker-Fancher, all they got is what they got. And, most wagon trains only traveled with enough to maybe defend against 1 or 2 Indian attacks, raiding parties, and, for hunting. They're not loaded for bear the way that the Mormons are. So there was already going to be a tactical disadvantage, and all of these trends get worse and worse as the 5 days progress.
Yeah.
So how fast does this wagon train move, and what is it running by at this time? I mean, is it coal?
No, it's
It's
livestock
horse-drawn.
power. It's just wagons.
Oh, okay,
It's
wagon.
pulled wagons by oxes. That's it.
Yeah, they're screwed. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yep. So on the let's see. Okay, so the leadership were in constant meetings as well during this, because it's like, now we got the people under siege. What the hell do we do with them? And it was given the executive decision that we gotta deal with them. We made our bed. We got to sleep in it. We gotta deal with this. So on the morning of September 11th, yes,
9/11.
September 11th. Yep. An infamous day when it comes to religious zealotry in American history.
My God.
Morning of September 11th, Isaac Haight and John D. Lee enter the encampment, and they are waving a white flag and saying and announcing to the Baker-Fancher Party that we've negotiated a truce with the natives who are besieging you, that if you give us your weapons and some of your wagons, then we will give it to them and they will allow you free passage. Now, of course, almost everybody in the party is like, nah, you're lying. This is just a ruse. You're just trying to get us defenseless. You're just trying to get our guns away from us. But these people have been starving for 5 days. What other option do they have?
And at the end of the day, that seems to be what they decided. Is like, well, we're going to get robbed, but at least we'll be alive.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is notable that there's the best book on this. One of the best books is the biography of John D. Lee by Juanita Brooks. It was a book that was written in the early 20th century, and it is an excellent take. It also features some data from people who were actually in attendance. But the more updated version of it is Blood of the Prophets, written by Will Bagley, and it's an early 2000s book. Excellent book. Multiple award-winning book. It's not only does it go through excruciating detail of the massacre itself, but it also goes through the history of the cover-up of it, which is quite remarkable in and of itself. And we could do an entire episode on that alone. So the Lee and Haight are discussing what to do here. John Higbee and John D. Lee are discussing how to do this. So Lee asks Higbee, how can you do this without shedding innocent blood, which is, getting rid of this problem? And Higbee says, have not these people threatened to murder our leaders and prophet? And have they not boasted of murdering our patriarchs and prophets, Joseph and Hiram? Now talk about shedding innocent blood. Why, brother, there is not a drop of innocent blood in that entire camp of Gentile outlaws. They are a set of cutthroats, robbers, assassins who aided to shed the blood of our prophets, Joseph and Hiram. And it is our orders from all in authority to get the immigrants from their stronghold and help the Indians kill them.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of mentality that is going into the leadership of the guys who are sieging the Baker-Fancher Party, right?
And it's interesting, for as much murder has been going on in Mormon land all this time, the idea of killing innocent blood, that is one thing that does give Mormons pause, as shedding the blood of an innocent. But not today. It doesn't happen today.
No, it does not. So the Baker-Fancher Party agreed, because what the hell else are they going to do? They have no other options than to agree to this surrender.
Yeah.
And at this point, the Mormon militia divides them up, and they have the men in an advance party, and then the women and children in a secondary party with most of the wagons. And with the men from the Baker-Fancher Party, they assign a Nauvoo Legion officer or legionnaire to each and every one of the Baker-Fancher men. So they're basically walking next to each of these guys, and each Mormon has a gun. Yep, in a long line. And they set up an ambush point. And this is just, maybe a couple kilometers outside of Mountain Meadows, the plain of Mountain Meadows where the siege itself was happening.
And it's horrific, because when the men see the Mormon militia, they give a cheer out because, oh, yay, they've come to rescue us. Hooray. And then they do the lineup and then they do the walk. And I hate to say it, but we're even avoiding, we're passing over some of the things they did attempt to do, send for help, send for rescue. But yeah, there's even more to the story than we're giving in this short,
Yeah. Once again, Blood of the Prophets. Pick up that book. There's even an audiobook of it that's excellently read. It's harrowing.
Yeah, harrowing. And I do discuss this in pretty good detail in my book as well.
Yeah. So the Mormon militia has all of the men singled out and away from their wives and children. And at this point, I believe it was Higbee who fired a shot in the air and yelled out the order to the Mormon men, "Halt, do your duty to Israel." Now, there are variations on exactly what he said there, but that captures the basic idea that this is religious zealotry fueling a massacre. And that is what happened because the men turned and fired.
Boom. Yeah. Yeah.
What'd they do with the women
system,
and children?
Single file. They just turned to the guy next to them and blew him away point blank. Yeah.
Well, that was just the beginning, right? The shooting of all of the men, and like these are also, point blank, roughly point blank muzzleloader shots. Pretty high likelihood that the person is going to die. Pretty low likelihood they're going to die immediately.
Right.
So,
and there's some that tried to run away, some tried to fight back, but second volley, that takes care of all of that. And then the screaming starts. And it's notable, too, that the Mormons had more troops set up at the ambush point when the men turned to shoot the guys they were guarding. There were men who were ringing the area who also began firing into it as well. So this initial volley killed most of the men. Either immediately or within a few minutes, they would be bleeding out and dying. Yeah.
But then they had the women and children to deal with as well. And they made a pact that all of the innocent children should not be killed in this, which they determined was basically anybody under the age of 8 years old or maybe 12 years old.
Which leads us to some sticky points like, how old is that kid? And they're making the decision. Do we shoot this kid? Okay, him shoot, her shoot, boom. And I believe they wind up with I'm trying to think the exact number of who they wound up with.
They didn't keep the women for themselves or something?
Oh, no. Yeah, no.
Well, this is pretty notable, too, because them leaving some kids alive, those kids lived to tell the tale.
Yeah.
Had they just killed the kids, dead kids tell no tales, I guess.
Exactly.
That's my point I'm making here on this podcast.
Nancy Huff was one of those kids who grew up later to give a witness. She was 4 years old at the time, saw her whole family killed before her eyes.
Yeah. Do you want to read that quote, David?
Oh, God. I only have, I don't have the exact quote, but I have you want to give it?
Yeah, I have it pulled up here. This is from Nancy Huff, right? 4 at the time. These are events that children remember. Even if they don't remember it consciously, these are events that shape their minds for the rest of their lives. She remembered this many years after the fact. She said, "They began killing everybody they came to. Captain Jack Baker had me in his arms when he was shot down and fell dead. I saw my mother shot in the forehead and fall dead. The women and children screamed and clung together. Some of the young women begged the assassins after they had run out on us not to kill them, but they had no mercy on them, clubbing their guns and beating out their brains." Here's another young kid who was 6 at the time, Calvin Milner. He watched his mother, his father, his 2 brothers, and 3 sisters all killed. His mom had been shot in the back with arrows, and he remembers distinctly pulling the arrows out of his mom's back as she was dying. A person who participated in the fight, named William Young, said, "I saw them kill a boy with rocks. I saw an Indian holding two girls, one in each hand. He held them among the balance of the Indians, and I saw no more of the two little girls." What happened to them, we don't know. A 6-year-old Rebecca Dunlap said that she ran and hid behind a sagebrush when the massacre began. 2 of her older sisters were killed right near her and were lying dead by her side. She heard her baby sister crying and ran to find her, and that she found her baby sister entwined in her mother's arms, and her mother was cold in death. And Sarah Dunlap, who was an infant at the time, was shot through her right arm below the elbow by a large ball. Now, this is an infant that was shot, nearly had its arm taken off, breaking both arms and cutting her arm half off. That's a direct quote. Yeah. So Rebecca grabbed her baby sister with, a dangling, just, hardly anything left of an arm, and ran for the bushes. She was, 6 years old at the time, grabbing her infant sister. You get the idea. This was the work that it probably took the sum total of 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and 140 men, women, and children, basically all of them, were shot, slashed, clubbed, beaten, or whatever, to murder.
And then the bishop ended the whole words with a blessing. Yeah.
So obviously you want these assholes to get what's coming to them for doing this, but does anyone find out about this? Yes, later on there's writings about this, but do they hide it? Is this like an unsolved mystery for many years and people are like, where'd they go? And no one knows?
Yeah, well,
that's complicated.
And it will remain complicated for 17 more years.
Yeah. So a number of it was known that this Baker-Fancher Party disappeared in Utah. It was known that it happened at the height of what was known as the Mormon War, this Cold War that Brigham Young and President James Buchanan were squaring off, and it was a controversial time. Yeah. And that expands to national politics as well, because this is the time right before the Civil War. Federal government is very occupied trying to keep the states unionized and keep the South from seceding. The Mormons are, in many ways, an afterthought of the federal government. It's a problem that can be dealt with in a different time. So people knew what had happened. The Mormons knew what had happened, but you didn't spill the secrets, or you mime your own death in the temple if you violate your oath to ever conceal and never reveal the secrets of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So the power and stranglehold that the Mormon theocracy had on the Mormons themselves to keep tight lips about this means that Mormons didn't talk about it. And it fell on the federal government to bring the case and try and prosecute the people involved.
And about 2 years later, that happens. Investigators from the feds come for that with a new federal judge.
Yeah. And they were only able to do that because Brigham Young had stepped down as governor. Had he been able to retain his governorship of Utah, his kingship, I should say, is a better fitting term, that never would have happened. This would have remained under the wraps. Yeah. A few points to note here. I believe it was James Henry Carleton that was head of this investigation to determine what happened to Mountain Meadows. When he went to the Meadows to investigate the scene, the Mormons didn't bury the dead. It was just sun-bleached bones and rotting corpses strewn out over a couple of miles.
Women's hair still clinging to like tumbleweeds and tree branches. And and bones just out and strewn about. Yeah.
They must have expected that the wolves would have come and cleaned it up, but wolves are going to eat a bit of human meat, but 140 people worth.
And by the time it's rotten, I don't think they're going to touch it after.
That's only effective for a couple of weeks, and then rotting in the September sun of Utah.
And I do have a quote from that 1859 investigation report. The scene was one too horrible and sickening for language to describe. Human skeletons, disjointed bones, ghastly skulls, and the hair of women were scattered in frightful profusion over a distance of 2 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
So also to add into so they conducted this investigation. When they got to the field, they weren't sure what to do. They collected as much evidence as they could, probably drew some sketches, and then they erected a pile of rocks as a monument to the people who had died. A massive pile of rocks as a marker, because they knew that as soon as they left, that the memory of what happened to those people would be gone forever.
Yeah.
Another point worth noting here, once the Baker-Fancher Party was all exterminated, all that was left were children under the age of 12, and almost all of them were taken by Mormon families and are taken in by Mormon families in St. George. When John D. Lee arrived in St. George and Jacob Hamlin arrived with a wagon full of kids, a bunch of them with gunshot wounds. Some of them had, brain trauma from bludgeoning. They were just given
all of them inconsolable and all of them covered in blood. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. They just gave these kids to Mormon families. And as a result of the investigation, it took like 15 years for it to happen. These kids that were now young adults by that time were returned to their families in Arkansas. And that's where a lot of the descendants of the Baker-Fancher Party live to this day, is still in Arkansas. Some also live in Arizona, and they preserve or they have a hand in preserving the monuments that are built there to this day. But another point worth noting, the goods that the Baker-Fancher Party had in their wagons were all appropriated by the Mormons and Native Americans. So they didn't just murder these people, they also stole all of the goods. And then Brigham Young, as the director of the Office of Indian Affairs, one thing that a person could do if they were raided by Native Americans is they could apply to the government for basically a recourse or remuneration for their goods that were stolen by Native Americans. So Brigham Young appealed to, or he applied to the federal government for reimbursement for the goods that were stolen by the Native Americans, and they reimbursed, I think it was like $2,500 worth of goods. So not only did the Mormons murder all these people, steal their goods, the government also paid them money for it.
For their trouble.
Dude, 2 minutes left. I was going to say, go ahead. 2 minutes left. 2
little quick things I want to add to that. The federal investigators who came to there were very sympathetic to the Mormons before they showed up. After they showed up, they completely switched and said, I always thought I lived in a land of civil and religious liberty, but the evidence shows I've been misled. Men are murdered here, coolly, deliberately, premeditatedly murdered, and determined by church council meetings, and for no other reason that they apostatized from the church and were struggling to leave the territory. In May of 1861, Brigham Young returned to Mountain Meadows with an entourage and stopped at that rock cairn we were talking about that they'd set up, that had by this time a huge wooden cross marking the site of the massacre, engraved with "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." And Brigham Young looked at that for a minute, then he raised his hand, and the guys came down and tore the whole thing down. Within 5 minutes, there was not a single stone left of the memorial. And he said, vengeance, what was his quote? "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I have repaid." said Brigham. Yeah.
Monster.
Oh.
Absolute monster.
You know, I had somewhat of a high hopes for this guy Brigham in a way, for being a businessman, even though I was hoping I would like him in a way like I kind of like Joseph Smith in a way.
Yeah.
I don't like him.
No.
I don't like him.
No.
Brigham Young has no redeeming qualities.
None.
None at all.
He's a good organizer. He makes the trains run on time, but
Yeah. As long as he owns the trains, if there is competitors' trains, he makes sure they never run.
Yeah.
So somebody did suffer legal consequences for this. His name was John D. Lee. In 1877, I believe, he was executed for orchestrating this.
Yeah. At the site of the massacre itself, even though he was Brigham Young's adopted son, even though he wrote several self-serving memoirs about how he only reluctantly took part and he tried to save them and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And despite so many people taking part in it, he's the only one who's went to trial all the way and was found guilty.
20 years after.
20 years after. Yeah.
Shot.
Brigham alive at the time?
Brigham died, I think. Who died? Who was it? Did John D. Lee die or Brigham Young die first?
No.
I think it was.
John D. Lee died because he predicted that Brigham Young would die within the year because of that.
That's right. And Brigham Young did.
And he was dead 6 months later.
That's right. Yep.
Bad canned apricots, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I mean, Brigham was also like
that.
Yeah, he was also like 75 years old or whatever at the time, too. Like, Brigham had lived a full life.
Yeah. And his last words were, Joseph, Joseph, Joseph. Unless you ask his official biographer, who says his last words were, I feel better. So there's that.
Cliffhanger. What do we have next? What's coming?
Oh my goodness. This show could go on forever. We haven't even talked about the things that have happened since. We haven't done our Q&A show.
I have to say, what better way to end a series on Mormon history than finishing with the most heinous events that Mormon orthodoxy and zealotry motivated and created.
Exactly.
Right? The first September 11th of American history, filled with bloodshed caused by religious fanatics. I mean, that's
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, we could do this series forever. And I think we should do a Spalding Theory episode. We definitely have some Q&A to do.
Yeah.
But
I think than one. I think there's going to need to be more than one Q&A show. I don't see this is the 27th episode, ladies and gentlemen. And we could go all the way to contemporary times. We could get stuck in the recent documentary about the Mormons. And
I was going to say, it might be worth to revisit that Murder Among the Mormons, because that's a pretty fascinating story. So
we'll probably do that after we get done doing some of the live stuff and fill out our audience and go from there. What do you guys say?
I like it. Let's set a date for a live show, a live Q&A, because obviously we've thrown so much information at the viewers, right? Like, I can, and we've seen a lot of the questions, and I presume there will probably be more based on just this episode alone. So let's do a Q&A and then, a couple wrap up episodes. But really, this does mark the true quintessence of what Mormonism sought to do and did, and could easily be motivated and, shaped and needed to commit again. This is terrifying. These are the bloody, bloody roots of Utah, and there's no escaping this history.
And Mormons today, who are some of the sweetest, most generous, loving people I know on this planet, when they look back on this, the ones who have looked into it and have been chilled about how they know if they had been there at that time, they probably would have been doing these murders too. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, leave your comments down below. Get your questions ready. The thrill ride is not over yet, but I could tell you this is definitely cold-blooded murder. I mean, this is next level massacre. And why I enjoy learning about the cults educating oneself and knowing the dangers of such cults and not repeating history. So thank you so much. Go check out Bryce Blankenagle's Patreon and join for free. Get part of his podcast. Help support him if you can. I mean, there's a free. I say free because if you just don't have the money, go do it. If you have what it takes, join and join certain tiers. Help him do what he's doing. This has been one of the most fascinating Mormonism rides I've ever seen anyone ever do on any video series online. And then also help David Fitzgerald by buying his book. It's down in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, both these guys have done fascinating work on the series. I ask you to help support what they do. It mean the world to me, for them coming out and spending this time and actually wanting to educate the general public. So thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I can't thank you enough for everything. Let's just see what the audience has to say. And if they want to resurrect something from the dead, that's a matter of how you guys feel about it. So they've got to make it worth your time to want to do something like that. And I'll leave it up to the audience, Thank you.
Yes. Awesome.
Never forget.
And thank you also, Derek, for providing a platform for us to chat. It's been a fun series.
It's been amazing. Yeah.
This is education, man. What'd you say, Dave?
I say my hat's off to both of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.